If you're thinking about buying a Wear OS smartwatch in 2026, you may get some great hardware, but it's still not going to be a great watch platform. And that issue matters more than most people realize. Why? Let's inspect. Hey, great to see you. I'm Michael, and I've been testing and reviewing smartwatches for many years now. This video is a bit different from my usual reviews. It's more about starting a conversation, more about sharing observations, hearing what you think about the current state of Wear OS, and talk about its future too. Because I believe that right now Wear OS is stuck in a very strange position. It looks modern, it has some big brands behind it, and on paper it should be dominating, just like Apple Watch in the Apple world. But in reality, it's still playing catch-up in areas that actually matter for daily use. So instead of asking which Wear OS smartwatch should I buy, the better question is, should I even buy into Wear OS right now at all? In this video, I'm going to walk you through the biggest reasons why Wear OS still hasn't fully taken off, based on real-world usage and not what marketing tries to sugarcoat. Let's start with the most obvious one and the major reason why even I don't use a Wear OS device most of the time, an issue that literally affects anyone. Battery life on Wear OS is still not where it should be. Yes, brands like Xiaomi, OnePlus and so on, they're making real improvements. They have better optimization, larger batteries, smarter software, but the core problem remains. The operating system itself is very power hungry. And here's the key detail that most people don't realize. Many modern Wear OS watches are essentially running two systems at once. You have the main processor for smart features and a secondary low-power chip handling things like step tracking, sleep, and basic health monitoring. This is not innovation, it's a workaround. Tells you that Wear OS in its current form simply isn't efficient enough to handle 24/7 usage on its own, especially overnight tracking where most watches switch to that low-power system just to survive the night. In real life, this means that you're still charging every day or every second day, which compared to brands like Garmin or Amazfit feels outdated. The second issue is less obvious, but just as important. Wear OS is expensive to run. Unlike simpler MCU-based smartwatches, the Wear OS system requires relatively powerful hardware. We're talking about ARM-based processors, which require some sort of license fees, and also they need usually 1 or 2 gigabytes of RAM at least, and more complex storage setups, which pushes the manufacturing costs up significantly. And what do you get in return? Not necessarily better performance. In fact, performance is often just good enough. It's smooth most of the time, but barely impressive, quite choppy after a watch restart, and more importantly, there's very little competition in that chipset space. Right now, you're basically looking at chips from Qualcomm and Samsung. That's it. Less competition means slower innovation, and that's exactly what we're seeing, incremental upgrades instead of real breakthroughs. Now this is where things get really interesting and also frustrating. Wear OS watches are trying to position themselves as serious health and fitness devices, but in reality, they are still behind dedicated platforms. Tracking is usually good enough for casual use, steps, heart rate, sleep and so on, but when you start looking at more advanced metrics, things fall apart very quickly. Sensor reliability is inconsistent, advanced training features are limited, and one thing that still feels completely unacceptable in 2026, poor support for external sensors. Connecting a chest strap, for example, should be a basic functionality. On platforms like Garmin or even Amazfit, it is straightforward. On Wear OS, it's either complicated, inconsistent, or simply not supported properly depending on the app. That's a huge limitation for anyone even slightly serious about fitness, and even the acquisition of Fitbit couldn't turn things around, especially for the Pixel Watch series. On theory, and this one is really big, Wear OS should have one of the biggest advantages being backed by Google. But in practice, the software experience is still very fragmented. You're going to find apps that work perfectly fine on Pixel watches, but they behave differently or are completely unavailable for the Samsung Galaxy watches and vice versa. And small players, they don't seem to have a chance, maybe because they are deprioritized by Google themselves. Compatibility is therefore inconsistent, and that creates confusion for users. Then there's performance and stability. It's better than it used to be, but glitches, slowdowns, and occasional bugs are still part of the experience. Updates are another issue. Despite multiple new versions of Wear OS over the past few years, the actual day-to-day experience hasn't changed dramatically. It feels like evolution is happening, but very slowly. There are still basic usability gaps. For example, transferring files between your phone and watch is not straightforward. Samsung have it as part of the one among the 5 apps they use for servicing Wear OS devices, but it's still missing with OnePlus and Xiaomi's models. Music playback is limited in strange ways, like not being able to fully use the watch speaker for simple playback scenarios. These are small things, but they add up, and they make the platform feel unfinished. At a first glance, Wear OS seems to have a strong app ecosystem. But once you actually start using it, a different picture appears. There are a lot of apps, quite many of them are watch faces, and they either have not so great quality or they are paid or somewhere in between, freemium. And the pricing doesn't always make sense given the limited functionality, which creates a very weird imbalance. Think about it. You have a relatively small user base, but a surprisingly large number of monetized apps. And instead of driving value, it often feels like noise. For most users, you end up using just a handful of core apps anyway, which makes the rest of the ecosystem feel unnecessary. The next reason is quite simple, but could be critical depending on your situation, and I still see a lot of people asking about it. But let me be very clear. Wear OS is not a good choice if you are using an iPhone. Actually, it shouldn't be an option at all because compatibility is completely missing, or technically, there is a geeky workaround, but it's not worth the effort. And even if it works, the experience is far from seamless. So if you are in the Apple ecosystem, Wear OS is basically not an option. And that automatically cuts off a huge portion of potential users and buyers. Finally, something that most people don't see directly but has a very significant impact. Over the past few years, we've seen key players step back from Wear OS. Brands like Fossil and TicWatch, manufactured by Modboy, but we have seen them doing some really impressive things like the first on-the-market dual-chip architecture, the first dual display setup. They're no longer major players, they're no longer in this ecosystem at all. And from what I've heard from industry sources, part of the issue has been Google's certification and development processes. Delays, restrictions, difficulty keeping up with updates, they have made it hard for some manufacturers to compete. And at the same time, Samsung and Google are becoming increasingly aligned. True that, the Galaxy Watches often get early access or exclusive access to the new Wear OS features. In return, Pixel watches often rely on Samsung hardware. This creates a semi-closed ecosystem inside what's supposed to be an open platform, and for the smaller brands, that's a problem. So where does this leave us? Well, in 2026, Wear OS could have its momentum. It looks better, it runs better, it has stronger branding than ever before, but it's still not fully competitive where it matters the most, namely efficiency, reliability, long-term usability, battery life. Right now, Wear OS mostly benefits from the increased sales of wearables and not its particular features and improvements, and yet there are potential solutions on the horizon. For example, new battery technologies like the silicon carbon could help, or more efficient chips could reduce the need for dual system designs, and most importantly, Google could significantly optimize and simplify the operating system, but that requires decent execution. And this is the key takeaway. The next 3, maybe up to 5 years are going to define Wear OS. If Google delivers, this platform has massive upside. It could become the true Android equivalent of the Apple Watch ecosystem. If not, it risks becoming something we've already seen before. A promising platform that never fully delivers, something like Android tablets all over again. So if you want a smartwatch with strong smart features, notifications, apps, Google integration, Wear OS can still be a very good choice today, but if your priority is battery life, fitness tracking, or reliability and consistency, there are a lot better options at the moment. MCU-based watches from brands such as Amazfit, Garmin, Xiaomi, and many others, they could be great, might cost less, and often are almost as good. And that's the honest reality. Wear OS is not bad, it's just not there yet, once again. So, if you have used a Wear OS device in your life, I'd love to hear from your experience in the comments, especially about long-term experience. And if this breakdown helped you to make a clear buying decision or get the sense of what happens in the Wear OS world today, please support the channel with liking and subscription, and support my work matters more than ever. And I'll keep my promise to always be transparent, objective, and available for you in the comments. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.